In this video, we're going to start building our composite that is going to be the end result of this tutorial. So I want to get rid of everything but my green screen footage. So I'm going to disconnect that by clicking and dragging across the connection lines, hold the Option or Alt key, select my render node, which grabs everything upstream, and just drag it to the bottom of the UI. And now we are back to having just our green screen footage. I'm also going to hold the Control key and tap to the side here to hide the media panel. I don't need it at this time, and I want to have more real estate for my schematic and my viewer. Obviously, we need to start pulling a mat on this. And there are many different ways to pull mats inside of Flame. There are several different keying tools, garbage match tools, and so on. So let's first try to use one of my favorite keying tools, which is called the Master Keyer. But just looking at this footage, there's definitely some issues where we have two people. We have the two talents. We have the guy, and over on the right-hand side, we've got this woman. Granted, it's just the edge of her hair, but we still need to be concerned with pulling a mat for this. Pulling the mat is going to be a little tricky because he is in focus and a little further away from the camera, whereas she is closer to the camera and very blurred. So one key or one keying tool might not get the job done. But I want to introduce you to the Master Keyer, and then we're going to also look at another tool called the GMask Tracer. So let's come down to our tools. I'll hit the M key with my cursor over my bin so that I can access all the tools with the M. And there is our Master Keyer, Master K. Pick that up and drag it out. I'm going to zoom in on my schematic just a little bit. Now, the way the Master Keyer works is you have the main front input, which is the red input. You have the background, green, and your mat. So you can feed in a mat if you wanted to. If I already had my background, if I already had the image that I wanted to use as a background, I could feed it into the green input and then feed the main end result of my green screen into here, into the main input, the front input, and the mat input, and then I can actually composite the elements together. But we're not going to do that. We're going to feed all three inputs with the one main result output from this. So I'm going to hold the Shift key. I'll take my Master Keyer and kiss the blue, kiss the green, and kiss the red. So now it is fed into all three inputs for my Master Keyer. I'll double click on the Master Keyer to access its parameters. The workflow with the Master Keyer is, if you look down here, we have two key pots, two key colors. I'll click on the left color pot. You'll see my cursor changes its icon to a picker, and I'm just going to click and drag in the screen. So that fills both the color pots immediately. Now keep in mind, as I mentioned before, a tool such as the Master Keyer has two separate outputs. We have our main end result, which is the RGB information. Then we also have the mat output. And in this viewport right now, we are looking at the main result, which is the RGB. And as I mentioned before, the hotkey for accessing the different results of a selected node is the F4 key. You toggle it to view the different end results. So if I hit F4 again, we're now looking at the mat output. If I hit F4 again, we're looking at the main RGB result output. So I want to go back to F4 one more time and look at my mat. And you can see that we're starting to pull the key. There's still some issues, obviously, as I had expected. Now let's come over and click in the right pot. And then I'll come over here and I'll click and drag in that area. So now if you look carefully, you'll see there's two separate colors inside these two pots. The idea is to sample the different areas of green, whatever color you're keying, and then you have this mix slider that you can go and start to adjust to figure out the best combination between the two of them. Because as I said, we want to maintain the nice clean edge around the guy, but we want to maintain the softness for this woman. Right next to where it reads key colors, you'll see it says sampling, and it reads mat. So we're still working on the initial pull, the initial sample of the mat. If I bring my cursor over the viewport and hold the Option key or the Alt key, and I move around, I'm going to receive different sliders offering me different parameters that I can then start to adjust. Clicking down in the view will set the current parameters as the active parameters. And now I can adjust the slider to the left or the right for the mat overall effect. I'll click down underneath the image to discard the slider. Another powerful part of the Master Keyer is using what's called patches. So I'll click where it reads mat, I get a flyout, and you can see now we get spill, blend, degrain, and 3 patches. I'll choose patch number 1, then I'm going to come into the viewport and hold in the Control key. I can click and drag to create a region selection. Now Flame is going to pull the mat based on the pixel values of where I just dragged in. And I can continue to do so to try to finesse my mat while maintaining the softness here and the sharpness of him. And as you saw, we have 3 patches in this keyer, so I can choose patch number 2, come over where there's some corruption in his shirt here, and just region select a small area of that to remove the corruption that's taken place there. As we can see, it's doing a pretty good job, but the truth is, the 2 separate people, the 2 talents we have here, the mat that is needed for each one of them is so different, we're probably not going to be able to achieve a good mat for him with the same tool that's pulling the mat for her. So a typical workflow in the past was I would use 2 separate master keyers and then combine the mats back together. Well, that's where the GMask Tracer comes in, because you can create multiple mats out of one tool and have different outputs for each one of those mats. So I'm going to take my master keyer, drag and drop it to the bottom of the UI. I'm going to click in this viewport and hit F4 to go back to looking at the main result of this node. And we'll come down to our tools, and I hit the G key to see all of our tools that start with G. You'll notice there's a GMask tool. That's been in Flame for a long time, and it's a good tool for creating just straightforward masks. The GMask Tracer has a lot more tools inside of it than just creating a mask. So I will drag my GMask Tracer into my schematic, holding the Option Shift key. I will connect the front input of the GMask Tracer to the main result output, the yellow, of my clip node. I'll double click on my GMask Tracer to access its parameters. First of all, we haven't looked at the Action 3D Compositing tool yet, but just understand that the GMask Tracer is based on the Action 3D Compositing tool. And when we do get into Action later, you'll recognize some of the stuff you're going to see down here in the editing panel for the tool. You'll notice there's 4 buttons over here. There's the Node button, there's the Object button, the Output button, and you have an Analyzer, which can be used for tracking, which we'll take advantage of a little bit later. I'll go back to the node bin for right now, where we access all of our tools that you have inside the GMask Tracer. At this time, I want to introduce you to another concept that is pretty unique to Flame, and that is specific tools such as the GMask Tracer and the Action Compositing tool have their own schematic. It's not a flowchart schematic like the batch schematic. It's a relationship schematic and a way of accessing and controlling the tools that you are using inside of the GMask Tracer or the Action tool. The GMask Tracer schematic shows you how different tools and elements are connected and how they are affecting each other. With the GMask Tracer selected and this viewport active, I'll go down to the viewing list, and you'll see when I expand that there is an option for GMask Tracer schematic, and the tilde key is your hotkey for accessing this schematic. But I'll just choose it from this flyout. My schematic has changed. I'm now looking at the GMask Tracer schematic, and there's a camera, the default camera, because once again, I'm repeating myself, but the GMask Tracer is based on the Action Compositing tool. I like to refer to this as stepping into the tools, because we've now entered the GMask tool. Looking over at our tools now, when I expand this out, you're going to see a lot more tools are available to you when you're inside the GMask Tracer. But for right now, I want to point out that it's at the Select tool, which is the M hotkey. Just keep that in mind. Down in our bin, we've got lots of different tools in here. There's one that's called GMask. I'm going to just double click on this GMask, and it's going to add an axis and a GMask into my schematic. Also notice what happened. My tool switched to the draw shape. So by double clicking on a GMask, I add a GMask with an axis that is controlling the position transformation of the GMask, and my tool switches to the draw shape. Now I can come into this view, I can click down, and I can just start to create a mask. And I'm sure this is very similar to any other masking tools that you've used before. You click and you drag, you create a curved Bezier point. If I just click down once, I create a corner point. Well, you can click and drag, and let me use the spacebar to pan over a little bit. And I'll just come over here, and I close the mask by clicking on the first control point that I created, and now my mask has been created. At this moment, we are looking at the Output Comp default. So that's the default camera that is part of the GMask tool. If I go to the Output tab, you can see the different outputs that we have available. I have the comp, and then we have the mat. If I click on the mat, we're now looking at the mat output for the GMask Tracer. So right now, this tool, let's do this. Let's hit the escape key with my cursor over this schematic. That steps us back out to the batch environment. And right now, all we have is one output, which is the mat. If I click and enable the comp, you'll now see another output has just been added. So now I have the main output, which is the RGB information, and I have the matte output, which is obviously the alpha information. I'll hit the tilde key once again to step back into our GMask Tracer schematic. With the GMask selected, I clicked on its node here in the schematic. It's now selected in my viewport. And I'm also at the select tool. We can grab a control point and start to alter and change the individual control point. Very standard stuff here. Expanding the tools once again, you're going to see this whole section here. This is relevant to controlling your mask, the shape of it, and so on. You got auto tangent, break tangent, select points, add points, draw shape, draw compass, slide textures, move UV textures. There's lots of control over the mask. If I wanted to add more points to this mask, I could come in here and choose Add Points, or I can hit the A key, which is the Add Points hotkey. And that's what I'll do. I'll discard my flyout, I hit the A key. You'll notice that a little plus sign just appeared next to my cursor, and I can now click and add a point, click and add a point. And then when I'm ready to stop adding points, I hit the M key, which is the Select hotkey. So I go back to just being at a select mode. If I want to delete a control point on a mask, I can hit the D key. Now you'll notice I'm in the delete tool, and you'll notice the little red minus sign or icon next to my cursor. And if I click on a control point, it deletes it. I'll hit the M key once again to go back to my select tool. If I go down to my object button, we'll see all these controls that appear for the actual GMask and the axis that is connected to it. With the GMask selected, you'll see over on the right-hand side, my tab reads GMask 1, and the parameters relevant to the GMask 1 are all right here, such as color, transparency, intensity, smoothing, blur. You can invert, you can lock. You also have other buttons you can use to access different parts of the mask control. Then over here, we have the axis 1. This is what I was talking about when I referred to a relationship schematic. Here, the axis 1 is connected and controlling our GMask. You can see the line that's connecting it with the little arrow, explaining the relationship between the two. So that's why we see the axis 1 controls and the GMask 1 controls at the same time, because these are related. You could use these parameters over here to manipulate and change the position, rotation, scale, shear, and center of your masks. If I want to rotate this, I can rotate this. And because we're in true 3D space, you can see you can rotate it in your Y, you can rotate it on the X, you can rotate it on the Z. I'll hold a control key and click in each one of these fields, which will reset it to its default setting of 0. You can also right-click over any one of the fields, and you'll get options such as setting keyframes, copying the channel, add channel to selection, and so on. I want to show you how you can create gradients on a mask. Even though it's not going to be relevant to the mask we're pulling right now, I just want to show it to you while we are talking about the masks. If I go to my tools and I switch once again to be the add tool. As we saw earlier, if I start to click on my mask, we're going to be adding control points. But if I hold the shift key down and then click on the mask, I create an edge gradient. So you can now create softness along the edge of the mask. And what's really nice is that this is independent of the control point of the mask, and you can add control points for feathering around the mask in various different degrees. So it doesn't have to be a unified feathering around your mask. I'll hit Control Z a couple times to go back to not having a gradient, because as I said, we're not going to need that as far as our mask. We'll stop the video here, and in the next video, we start creating the mask for our female talent.